I thought the sapphire ring on my finger meant loyalty. It was the family's way of saying I belonged. But last night, a stranger's hand wore it on Instagram at a rooftop party in Dubai, laughing with my husband. I froze, rewound the clip, counted the scratches only I knew were there. Andrew had told me he was in Geneva for meetings. The champagne glass in his hand, the smile he wore, it was the same smile he gave me on our wedding day. That was the moment I realized the marriage I was defending didn't exist, and neither did my trust. I used to believe our life was a picture framed in gold, untouchable by dust or doubt. Andrew and I were the couple people pointed to when they spoke about having it all. We hosted charity galas under chandeliers older than our parents, spent summers on yachts, and were front row guests at art auctions. His name carried the weight of a media empire, and mine, as his wife, was the elegant ribbon that tied it together. At 36, I had a thriving consultancy firm and a marriage that looked flawless from every angle, or so I thought. The sapphire ring on my finger had been more than a gift. It was a declaration from his mother, a woman whose approval was rarer than diamonds. She'd slid it onto my hand during an intimate family dinner, her smile tight but deliberate. "Now you're truly one of us," she had said, and in that moment I felt I had crossed an invisible threshold. That ring wasn't just metal and stone. It was my passport into their world. But the internet has a way of showing you the truths you never asked for. I was scrolling through Instagram absent-mindedly when a reel caught my eye. A rooftop in Dubai, city lights shimmering like scattered jewels, champagne flutes clinking, and there, laughing, turning her wrist in the light, was a woman wearing my ring. Not one like it. My ring. The way the sapphire tilted, the faint scratch along the gold band that only I noticed when I polished it, it was all there. I replayed it 3 times before I could breathe. The caption read, "Dubai Nights, Jannah Private Party." The account was private, but the 30-second clip was enough to lodge a shard of ice in my chest. When Andrew returned from his Geneva meetings 2 days later, I waited until after dinner to mention it. I poured him a glass of Barolo, kept my tone casual. "Someone posted a video from Dubai." "Looked like my ring," I said. He laughed, that low, easy sound that had once melted my doubts. "Photoshop, Eleanor. People have too much time on their hands." He took a sip and kissed my cheek, the conversation dismissed before it could even take root. But the way his eyes flickered, briefly, sharply, told me I'd brushed against something real. I let it drop. Outwardly. Inwardly, my mind began cataloging every irregularity of the past few months. The sudden trips, the vague explanations, the new passwords on accounts that used to be open to me. I told myself I was being paranoid, yet the doubt was no longer a whisper. It had a pulse. It was a rainy Tuesday when the next crack appeared. I was working in the study when his iPad pinged, a device we both used for schedules and notes. A banner slid across the screen, a message thread titled "Family Trust." I shouldn't have looked, but my fingers moved before I could talk myself out of it. The conversation was about a deal worth 7 figures, routed through my consultancy firm as a tax shield. The language was cold, transactional, as though my company were a chess piece moved across a board I didn't even know existed. Scrolling back, I saw something that made my stomach twist. A contact labeled M. Walsh had sent the address and personal details of someone named Channing Reed, the supposed partner in this deal. Monsieur Walsh wasn't me. It was Margaret Walsh, my mother-in-law. Margaret had always been exacting. She measured people the way jewelers measure clarity and cut, and she had never hidden the fact that she considered me an outsider. But she also valued the image Andrew and I projected, our brand, as she once called it. The idea that she would not only tolerate, but facilitate something that used my name and company for purposes I hadn't consented to was more than betrayal. It was a violation. I sat there, the sound of rain against the windows blurring into the hum of the city, The sapphire ring felt heavier than it ever had, as though it knew the role it played in all of this. In the reflection of the darkened glass, I saw myself, still dressed in the trappings of privilege, still wearing the symbols of belonging, yet suddenly aware that I might be nothing more than a pawn in a game I hadn't agreed to play. That night, I lay in bed beside Andrew, listening to his steady breathing. My mind replayed the Dubai reel, the scratch on the ring, the cold precision of the text messages. Each detail was a thread, and together they began to weave a tapestry I didn't want to see. But I knew, with a clarity that left no room for denial, that the gilded cage I had once admired from within was, in fact, a prison. And the people who had locked me inside were the same ones who had promised to protect me. I didn't yet know how deep the betrayal went, but I knew this. I would not ask for answers. I would find them. And when I did, the ring, the family, the cage, they would all burn. I became an actress in my own life. Every morning I kissed Andrew goodbye as though nothing gnawed at me, my voice soft, my questions carefully crafted to sound like idle curiosity. When he said he had another trip coming up, Hong Kong this time, I nodded and smiled. Inside, I was already planning my next move. 2 nights before his departure, I slipped an AirTag into the lining of his carry-on. It was small, white, and easily overlooked, nestled between the silk lining and a side seam. If Andrew noticed a change in the bag's weight, he didn't show it. I watched him wheel it into the car that morning, the driver closing the trunk with a sharp click. Hours later, the tracker showed him, not in Hong Kong but in Singapore, parked at the Marina Bay district. I zoomed in on the map, my breath catching as the dot settled at the coordinates of an exclusive penthouse. My mind spun through questions I couldn't yet answer. Was Evelyn Brooks there? Was this another business meeting with champagne and lies? The device's location updated every few minutes, and I sat in my office pretending to work, watching the tiny circle blink on my phone screen like a heartbeat. Then abruptly, the signal froze. A notification slid across my phone. AirTag detected moving with you. Location tracking disabled. My chest tightened. Andrew had found it. I imagined him opening his bag, seeing the tracker, realizing I had been following him. That knowledge sat between my ribs like a blade. If he confronted me, I would play the fool. If he didn't, it meant he already had his own plans. That night, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a man named Carter Vale, once a respected investigative journalist, now a ghost in the underworld of digital espionage. He agreed to meet me in a dimly lit cafe far from the Walsh family's usual haunts. His hair was grayer, his eyes sharper. "You're playing a dangerous game, Eleanor," he said after I told him everything. "But lucky for you, I like dangerous." With nothing more than Andrew's iCloud login, one he hadn't updated since our early marriage, Carter slipped through the digital gates as if they were paper. Hours later, he sent me a single encrypted file labeled Family Trust. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were videos, grainy but clear enough, of Andrew speaking with a man I didn't recognize, the two of them discussing wire transfers to an offshore trust. My company's name was mentioned repeatedly, my signature forged on documents that shimmered under fluorescent light. I watched one clip 3 times, memorizing the way Andrew leaned back in his chair, casual as he plotted the movement of money in and out of jurisdictions. The sums were staggering. So was his calm. This wasn't a desperate gamble. It was a well-oiled machine. I didn't waste time. The next day, I contacted a financial attorney named Lucas Grant, a man known for taking down a rival dynasty to the Walsh family. We met in his private office, a space lined with law books and old courtroom sketches. "You understand," he said, "that anything we do from here has to be airtight. If this leaks prematurely, they'll come after you with everything they have and make it stick." I nodded. "I don't want to move yet. I just need to understand exactly what they're doing." We built a fragile alliance, Carter would keep scraping Andrew's cloud backups for new files. Lucas would quietly map out the legal avenues for when, if, we struck. I would maintain my performance as the devoted wife, even as my nights filled with encrypted messages and my days with carefully hidden dread. The risk was clear. Accessing Andrew's private files was already a legal minefield. If he caught wind of what I was doing, or if his mother suspected my hand in it, I could be accused of violating privacy laws, corporate espionage, even fraud. That was their weapon against me. My proximity to the crime made me vulnerable. They could paint me as a co-conspirator in their schemes, just as easily as they could cut me out of their lives. Still, doing nothing was no longer an option. I had seen too much. The truth whispered through wires and screens, and I couldn't unhear it. I was already in the net. They just didn't know I was learning how to weave it in my favor. The photograph appeared in a glossy lifestyle magazine, part of a spread on women behind the scenes of power. She wore a black silk dress, her hair in an elegant chignon, and on her hand, unmistakable, was my sapphire ring. The caption read, "Evelyn Brooks, Senior PR Consultant for Walsh Media Group." My throat tightened. I knew the name. She had once been a fixture in society pages before her divorce from a Fortune 500 CEO made headlines for all the wrong reasons. The public thought she had disappeared. In reality, she had been standing in my place. Her connection to Andrew was easy to trace. Carter dug through archived press releases, event photos, internal memos. She had been hired 6 months ago. 6 months ago, Andrew's international expansion trips had doubled. 6 months ago, my company's quarterly statements began showing unexplained fluctuations. Lucas plotted them on a chart. Each trip matched a withdrawal from my firm's trust account, transfers disguised as marketing expenses. It wasn't just about Evelyn wearing my ring, it was about her wearing my life. I stared at the latest report Lucas handed me. The ink was still fresh. A transfer just this morning, nearly $500,000, authorized with an electronic signature that mimicked mine perfectly. "There's no supporting invoice, no contract, nothing," Lucas said. "If an auditor saw this, it would be your name on the chopping block." I felt the cold seep into my bones. Control was slipping. Every step I'd taken to quietly gather evidence was being matched by their speed in erasing or redirecting the trail. The board was shifting under my feet. Desperation breeds risk. That night, I drafted an email designed to bait Andrew, disguised as correspondence from one of his offshore contacts. I dangled the prospect of a new tax shelter, hinting at the need for him to confirm certain past transactions. I set it to send from an encrypted account, then waited. The reply never came. Instead, Andrew appeared at my office door the next morning, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. He closed the door behind him, leaned against it. "I've been getting strange emails. From you." My stomach dropped. He slid a printed copy across my desk. My own words stared back at me, stripped of their disguise, my alias somehow linked to my real address. "Care to explain why you're fishing for information on my business contacts?" His voice was calm, but the air between us was taut. I reached for composure. "It's not what you think." "No," he cut in. "It's exactly what I think. You're trying to set me up, and if I can prove you're accessing accounts that aren't yours—" He let the sentence hang, the threat implicit. That night, Lucas called. His voice was grave. "Eleanor, I've uncovered something. The instructions to use your company as a tax shelter, they didn't come from Andrew. They came from his mother." Margaret's name on the documents was a shock, and yet, in hindsight, it explained too much. The seamless way my business had been roped in, the immunity she enjoyed in family circles, the confidence Andrew displayed. She wasn't protecting her son's empire. She was expanding it, laundering their assets under my signature. "If this goes to court now," Lucas continued, "you'll be painted as a willing participant. You signed the incorporation papers. Your name is on the filings. Without proof you were unaware, they could prosecute you as a co-conspirator. The words co-conspirator echoed in my mind long after I hung up. It didn't matter that my trust had been exploited. On paper, I was entangled in their scheme. I lay awake until dawn, the ceiling above me shifting in shadow. The pieces on the board were in motion, and I was no longer certain I was the one moving them. Somewhere across the city, Margaret was likely sipping her morning coffee, secure in the knowledge that if anyone took the fall, it would be me. And Evelyn Brooks? She would keep wearing my ring, my life, until I found a way to take the game back, if I still could. The first rule of survival in their world was to appear compliant. I let Andrew see the weariness in my eyes, the slump in my shoulders. I nodded when he slid contracts toward me, let my pen trace my signature in the places he indicated. My voice softened when he spoke about putting this unpleasantness behind us. What he didn't see was the micro lens hidden inside the Mont Blanc pen I'd presented to him as a peace offering. It gleamed under the office light, its weight perfect in his palm, no different from the pens he favored, except that every movement it captured was being streamed to a secure server Carter had prepared. 2 days later, my luck doubled. A woman named Claire Dalton called from an unlisted number. She had once been Margaret's personal assistant, dismissed for breach of trust 3 years ago. "I know what they're doing to you," she said without preamble. "I still have copies of the emails. And the contracts they forged, you were never meant to see them." We met in the back of a bookstore cafe. She slid a flash drive across the table. "I kept them for insurance," she said. "Now I think you'll need them more than I do." That night, the camera pen recorded Andrew sitting across from Margaret in the Walsh family library. Shelves of leather-bound volumes surrounded them, the firelight casting shadows on their faces. "Once the Dubai transfer clears," Margaret said, "we cut her out, sell the consultancy to Reed's group. Eleanor will walk away with nothing." Andrew nodded, his tone colder than I'd ever heard it. "She won't see it coming." I watched the footage twice, my hands trembling, the pen's perspective catching every calculated smile. It wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated erasure. The next morning, I packaged the video and Claire's files into 2 separate folders. One went to the FBI, marked urgent. The other went to a journalist at the Ledger, a man known for dismantling corporate empires with his exposés. I didn't wait for confirmation. Once released, the truth would burn through their carefully woven image like acid on silk. By the end of the week, the first domino fell. The Ledger published a front-page story detailing the forged contracts, the offshore accounts, the shell companies tied to Walsh Media. Phrases like tax evasion, fraudulent transfers, and forged signature screamed in bold type. Embedded in the article was a still frame from my pen's footage. Margaret's face half lit by fire, her words in the caption, "Cut her out." Then the FBI raids began. Andrew's office was emptied into cardboard boxes. Computers were sealed in evidence bags. The stock price plummeted 30% in a single day, investors fleeing as reporters swarmed the headquarters. But the most damning revelation came from Carter's final scrape of Andrew's digital history. A scan of a passport under the name Daniel Cross. The photograph was Andrew's, the birth date altered, the nationality changed. The passport had been used to open accounts in the Cayman Islands, accounts that had been quietly funneling millions out of reach. I thought the war might be over then, but Margaret's silence was a shield. She issued a statement expressing shock and dismay, painting herself as a matriarch blindsided by her son's actions. The press, hungry for the bigger story, turned their lens almost entirely on Andrew. Margaret, untouched by subpoenas, retreated into the marble halls of her estate. When I saw the headlines, "Walsh, heir under federal investigation," there was a hollow satisfaction in me. I had scorched part of the empire, but the architect of my ruin still stood behind her walls, unscathed. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by my own fire. The sapphire ring lay on the table, catching the light. I wondered if burning one tower of their fortress was enough, or if I needed to raise the foundation. The answer was already forming, sharp and certain. The game wasn't over. Not yet. The court's decision came down in my favor, at least for now. My company remained in my hands, protected under an injunction that froze any attempted sale or transfer. It should have felt like victory, but the air around me was thick with something far heavier than relief. The moment the judgment hit the news cycle, my inbox flooded with interviews, congratulations, and offers of partnership. Yet just as quickly, the other tide rolled in. Accusations, think pieces, whisper campaigns questioning my integrity. On morning talk shows, commentators dissected my marriage like a reality drama. Some called me a survivor, others a gold digger who had played the victim to secure her fortune. The noise became constant, the lines between truth and narrative blurring until even I could feel the edges of my own story fray. Then came the PR blitz. Walsh Media hired an elite crisis management team, the kind that reshapes public perception with surgical precision. Headlines began to shift. Estranged wife orchestrates husband's fall. Eleanor Walsh's secret motives revealed. Anonymous sources claimed I had been plotting against Andrew for years, that my own finances were suspect. My face was suddenly everywhere, paired with words like ambition and betrayal in the same breath. The collateral damage was swift. Julia Hayes, my head of client relations and one of my oldest friends, called in tears to say her biggest account had been pulled. "They don't want to be connected to the scandal," she said, her voice breaking. I could hear the unspoken fear. How long before my name became poison to everyone around me? I told her we'd find a way to make it right, but when I hung up, the glass in my hand felt like lead. This was the price of wearing the crown, even for a moment. It came lined with thorns, sharp enough to pierce anyone who stood too close. Lucas kept working the case, but his latest findings hit like a slow-rolling earthquake. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the transfers, they were just threads in a much larger web. Walsh Media wasn't simply a corporation. It was a node in an international family company that spanned multiple industries, a labyrinthine structure woven into the political and economic fabric of several countries. Senators, foreign ministers, CEOs, all tied in through discrete investments and reciprocal favors. At the center of that web wasn't Margaret, as I had believed, nor even Andrew. It was Charles Walsh, Andrew's father, a man who had supposedly retired from public life a decade ago. I had met him only twice at holiday dinners where he spoke little and smiled even less. Now, through Lucas's documentation, I could see him for what he was. The architect. The accounts in Cayman were his. The trust in Dubai, his. Margaret and Andrew were players, yes, but they moved at his command. When I asked Lucas how certain he was, he didn't flinch. 100%. Every major transfer over the past 5 years ties back to him. The revelation settled in my chest like cold ash. My marriage had never been about love, not in the way I had believed. It was a calculated transaction, a merger designed to use my business as a legitimate conduit for their money. I wasn't a partner. I was infrastructure. The sapphire ring, the warm welcomes, the invitations into their world, it had all been theater to secure their pipeline. That night, I pulled out my wedding album. In every photograph, Charles's gaze lingered in the background. Never on us, always on the camera, as if ensuring the record would show what he wanted. I closed the album and set it aside. I had been crowned once, but the metal was poisoned, and it had seeped into every corner of my life. I understood now. If I wanted freedom, if I wanted to win, I couldn't just topple Andrew or expose Margaret. I would have to bring down the king. The decision came to me in the quietest hour of the night, when the house felt hollow and the city beyond the windows was only a dim reflection in the glass. I could keep fighting behind closed doors, bound by legal formalities and whispered threats, or I could break the game entirely. The choice was sharp and final. 2 weeks later, I sat in a cramped meeting room at an undisclosed location, across from a team of investigative journalists representing three of the most respected outlets in the world. I handed over an encrypted drive, the culmination of months of quiet gathering, of every risk I'd taken, every sleepless night I'd endured. Contracts, video footage, financial records, offshore account details, everything. Once this goes public, one of them said, there's no undoing it. That's the point, I replied. When the story broke, it didn't just ripple, it detonated. The coverage spanned continents, headlines screaming of corruption, money laundering, and political collusion. Photos of Charles Walsh, long absent from public life, reappeared alongside diagrams of the global network he commanded. Margaret's voice from my pen footage played on international broadcasts, translated into multiple languages. Andrew's false passport became a symbol of elite impunity, and the fury that followed was swift. But truth has a price. By pushing the files into the light, I exposed myself as well. My name was now forever linked to the scandal, my business scrutinized by regulators and opportunists alike. To keep my freedom and the safety of those who still stood by me, I had to make the hardest concession of my life. I would relinquish my claim to a portion of the assets tied to the Walsh family's shell companies. Lucas called it a strategic retreat. I called it cutting off a poisoned limb to save the body. I walked away from the Walsh empire entirely. Shares, titles, anything that could keep me tethered to their legacy. The sapphire ring was returned to a lawyer's desk in a small velvet box. My company remained mine, intact, supported by the employees who had weathered the storm without flinching. We were leaner now, but sharper, stripped of the dead weight and hidden rot that had almost destroyed us. In the months that followed, I began building something new, not just for myself, but for women who had been ensnared in the same gilded traps I had escaped. The foundation was called Glassbreaker, a name that carried the image that had haunted me through every stage of my fight, the shattering of the illusion that wealth and security were one and the same. We provided legal aid, financial education, and investigative support to those whose marriages had been used as pipelines for deceit. The first woman we helped was a school teacher from Boston, whose husband had funneled her pension into a fraudulent investment scheme. Watching her walk out of the courthouse free from debt, her head held high, I felt something unfamiliar, not just relief, but renewal. Somewhere along the way, the narrative around me began to shift. I was no longer only the woman in the scandal, the wife who had turned against her powerful family. I became the strategist who had dismantled a fortress from the inside, the advocate who had turned her own wreckage into a weapon for others. A year after the first Glassbreaker case, I received an email from a publishing house. They wanted my story in my own words, unfiltered. I hesitated. Writing it down meant reliving it, but I also knew that stories, once told, could move faster and further than any document filed in court. The book, Phoenix Ascent, debuted to critical acclaim. The adaptation came next, a documentary series that paired my interviews with footage from the investigations, the courtrooms, the media storms. Watching it air for the first time, I was struck by how far I had come from that night staring at an Instagram clip in disbelief. In the final scene, the camera followed me to the steps of the Glassbreaker offices. The interviewer asked, "Do you feel like you've won?" I thought about Andrew, Margaret, Charles, the empire they'd built and the ruins it had left. I thought about the women who had walked into my office broken and left with something stronger than they had ever imagined. "No," I said. "I didn't win their game. I ended it, and I built my own." The crown they had once placed on my head had long since been cast aside. In its place were wings, earned, not given, and the sky ahead was mine to claim.